Okay, there's a lot of people here. Wow. I'm going to keep my train of thought this time. Last time I was up here and preached on a Wednesday, I couldn't remember the title of my sermon. It was ironically Focus. That was bad. So this time I wrote it big letters on the front, and I got it this time. So if you have a Bible, go ahead and turn to Daniel chapter 1. Daniel chapter 1, and I'm going to be talking about a student of the king. A student of the king. Daniel chapter 1, and I'm going to start in verse number 3. And the king spake unto Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel, and of the king's seed, and of the princes, children in whom was no blemish, but well favored, and skillful in all wisdom, and cunning in knowledge, and understanding science, and such as had ability in them to stand in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans. And the king appointed them a daily provision of the king's meat, and of the wine which he drank, so nourishing them 3 years, that at the end thereof they might stand before the king. I want to start by looking at the early years of Daniel's life. The first thing I'd like to point out is that Daniel was chosen by the king. At the beginning of the chapter, verse number 1, it says, they came upon Jerusalem and besieged it. Israel was under attack, and the temple was overtaken. And the king, King Nebuchadnezzar, sent out Ashpenaz, Mr. Ashpenaz, and said, I want you to go find the best children in Israel. But not just any children. The king had a standard. Let's look at that standard. He says, children in whom was no blemish, but well favored, skillful in wisdom and knowledge, understanding science. So he says, okay, Mr. Ashpenaz, I want you to go out and look for the best children, no blemish. They looked pretty good, I guess. They were well favored. Everyone liked them. Skilled in wisdom and knowledge, so pretty smart, and understanding science. Ooh, who here likes science? Anybody? Raise your hand. I'm not going to raise my hand. Who here likes science? Come on, science nerds, raise your hand. There we go. Got a few out here. Coach, raise your hand. Got him. Okay, I do not like science, though. It never made sense to me. Speed of light with a vector, and I don't get it. Never clicks. I took a few years. Something like that. But understanding science, let's just take it as he was good in school. So the king had a standard, but let's look at the king's choice. He's among those that were selected, 4 are named, and the names were apparently changed to honor Babylonian gods in the next verses. So Daniel was chosen, and his name means God is my judge in Israel. And his name was changed to Belteshazzar, meaning a servant of Bel. Hananiah means the Lord is gracious, and his name was changed to Shadrach in honor of the sun god. Mishael, meaning who is what God is, was changed to Meshach in honor of the moon god. And Azariah, the Lord helps, was changed to Abednego, a servant of Nebo. The names originally in Israel were names that honored God, all of them, a servant of God. But their names were changed to honor Babylonian gods. I can understand that. They came from Christian homes. They would have gone to the Christian school, did their devotions every morning. They went to church. They grew up in Christian families. And their names were changed. Let's look at the king's plan that we read. They were to be taken from their homes, renamed to honor Babylonian gods, and were to be fed and taught for 3 years. And at the end of the 3 years, they would stand before the king. That's a little scary to me. Daniel's around 15 years old right now. He's taken from his home, not a choice. They didn't ask him. They just took him. Take him to the king's palace. And later, he's going to stand before the king. Taken from his family, that's pretty frightening. I'm 17, and I would be scared. Like, think of the scariest thing that's ever happened to you. Thinking? Okay, if you can't think of one, who here has ever been in an accident, car accident? Raise your hand. Yep, you're not afraid. Well, I can raise my hand for that one now, because on Sunday, I may or may not have hit somebody, and it may or may not have been my fault. But I remember I was pretty scared. In fact, I was really scared, and I was shaken up, and I couldn't move, and I was really scared like that. It was one of the scariest things I can think of right now. But just put yourself in Daniel's shoes. He is around 15, and taken from his home. That's really scary. But Daniel, he was chosen by the king. Let's look at his purpose. Verse number 8 in chapter 1 says, but Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. He purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself. Daniel drew a line. He had been taken from his home. His name had been changed, but he would not defile himself. It could be that the meat was unclean or offered unto idol worship, which would go against God's law to the Israelites. But he had an absolute standard in his life that he would not defile himself. I'd also like to point out that he made a request to his authority. Verse 8 says, therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs. Verse 9 says, now God brought Daniel into favor and tender love with the prince of the eunuchs. He requested that he didn't have to. He didn't go to this prince and say, look, I'm not going to eat it. Nope, I can't do it. That could have cost him his head, like literally. The king said, fine, that kid won't do it, kill him. That would have been really bad, obviously. But Daniel had a relationship with his authority such that he went and requested it to him. That relationship with his authority came good for him. Chapter 2, I believe, later on, the king has a dream. And back then, when he had a dream, he'd send for all of his wise men and magicians and ask what his dream was about. So this particular dream, he brings them in until it says, tell me what my dream means. They say, sure, O king, thou great king, what was your dream? He says, I can't remember, but tell me what it means. They say, well, can you give us some details? Because that's kind of hard to go off of. He's like, no, just tell me what it means. They obviously couldn't do it. He gave them no details. They couldn't tell him his dream. And the king gets so mad, he sends out a decree to kill all the wise men in his land. Now, obviously, he wasn't the wisest man to do that. But that could have been really bad. See, Daniel, he had stayed with the king's employees and stuff, and they could have said, yes, this little brat that we had to take care of for 3 years, we can finally get rid of him. They could have gone straight to his house and said, yes, it's done. But no, that's not what happened. Daniel built a relationship with his authority such that they went straight to Daniel, not to kill him, but to warn him, to tell him what's going on, to ask for his help. Daniel was respected because of his relationship with his authority. So Daniel was chosen by the king. Daniel lived with a purpose. Let's look at Daniel's faith. He makes a proposal in verse number 10. And the prince of the eunuchs said unto Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who hath appointed your meat and your drink. For why should he see your faces worse liking than the children are of your sort? Then shall ye make me endanger my head to the king. Then said Daniel to Melzar, whom the prince of the eunuchs had set over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, prove thy servants, I beseech thee, 10 days, and let them give us pulse to eat and water to drink. The prince is saying, look, Daniel, I know you don't want to defile yourself. I know what you're doing here, but if the king finds out that I didn't make you eat it, my head's on the line. He'll kill me. Daniel says, okay, I understand that. Give us 10 days. Prove us for 10 days. Daniel knows that this pulse and water, vegetables and water, is not going to make his face, or it's not going to make him bigger than the other kids that are eating the king's meat. But Daniel has faith in God. Let's look at the result. Verse 15 says, and at the end of the 10 days, their countenance appeared fairer and fatter in flesh than all the children which did eat the portion of the king's meat. Thus Melzar took away the portion of their meat and the wine which they should drink and gave them pulse. And in verse number 17, because of his faith, he's rewarded by God. As for these 4 children, God gave them knowledge and skill in all learning and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. Daniel showed crazy amount of faith there. He could have been killed. 10 days, nothing happens. Then he doesn't let him live. He's not going to eat the king's meat. He purposed in his heart. That wouldn't work out very good. He trusted in God. So Daniel was chosen by the king. Daniel lived with a purpose. Daniel shows faith. Let's look at Daniel's interview. Verse 18 says, now at the end of the days which the king had said he should bring them in, then the prince of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. And the king communed with them. And among them all was found none like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore stood they before the king. Daniel and his friends stood out. The king has all the children. He says, hey, there's something different about them. There's something different about them. Bring them to me. I want to test them. Verse number 20, they are found 10 times better than all the other kids and the king's counselors. It says, and in all matters of wisdom and understanding that the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers that were in his realm. And Daniel continued even until the first year of King Cyrus. Nearly 70 years. The king saw something different about them. Something different about Daniel, Azariah, Mishael, and Hananiah. He saw something different about them. Daniel and his friends, they were taken from their homes, renamed, placed in a worldly environment. But they didn't conform. You know what? There are lots of children taken from their homes. Lots of Israelites. They grew up in Christians' homes, went to a Christian school, went to church. Lots of them were taken. But only these 4 are mentioned in the Bible. What do you think happened to those others? They didn't live with a purpose. They didn't stand up and say, I'm not going to defile myself. They went with the flow. everyone else is doing it. Well, I don't see why I can't do it. He's doing it. He goes to church. I can do it. It's fine. Or, oh, look at, everyone's doing it. It's okay. No, he didn't do that. He says, no, I'm not going to defile myself. But they gave in to the worldly temptation. Now, let's go back and apply this to our own lives. The first point, just like Daniel was chosen by the king, we have been chosen by the king. 1 Peter 2:9 says, but ye are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, and holy nation, a peculiar people, that ye should show forth the praises of him who hath called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Being Christians, we are chosen by the King of Kings. And just like Nebuchadnezzar had a standard for the people he wanted, God also has a standard for us. Let's look at the king's standard for us. Romans 12:1 says, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that ye present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. And be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that ye may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. He says to present your bodies a living sacrifice. Be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of my mind. The Bible also says to know God's word, to keep God's commandments, and to be a witness for Christ. We should follow after Christ's standard for us. Let's look at the king's choice. Just like Daniel and his friends were taken and renamed, when we were chosen by the King of Kings and we accepted Christ into our heart, our names are also changed. And that name is Christian. We carry Christ's name with us wherever we go. And the king also has a plan for us. Let's look at the king's plan. Jeremiah 29:11 says, for I know the thoughts that I think towards you, saith the Lord, thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you an expected end. God has a plan for all of our lives. No one knows you like God does. He has a plan specifically for you. We should seek out God's plan for our lives. You know what? I'm 17. I'm sure my problems aren't the biggest problems in the world. But I got college coming up. That's a big decision of what am I going to do with my life? That's a big decision. I'm sure where are you going to go to work? There's a lot of decisions that you don't know what to do. There's no black and white. It's what do I do? I don't know what God wants me to do. But we should seek out God's help. Read the Bible. Ask God what his will is for your life. So we have been chosen by the king. Let's look at our purpose. Read in Daniel that he purposed in his heart. He didn't just go with the flow, do what everyone else was doing. He lived with a purpose. I think Pastor a few weeks, maybe a few months ago, talked about Benjamin Franklin and 13. I learned this in literature. I should know this. 13 virtues, I think, that Benjamin Franklin lived by. Those are moral absolutes in his life that he was for sure going to live by. What about you? Do you live your life with a purpose? I'm sure Daniel didn't go live his life just la 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 and la la land and go around and where do I go next? School time. Okay. Let's go to school. 8:59. 7:59. I'm on time. Ooh, history class. This is the same every year. Never changes. Ooh. Yep, World War II. That was a while ago. Civil War. Oh, history class is over. Okay. Algebra. MC plus T. Yeah. Letters don't belong in math. Come on. La, la, la. Let's draw something. This is boring. Okay, this is over. Time for anatomy class. This is fun. All these bones and memorize 2,563 muscles. Yep, this is awesome. Oh, school's over. Sweet. Weekend. And then he gets to church. And he gets to church and says, okay, let's go to church. And he gets there, gets in his spot, sits in his pew. He's got his Bible, says, I'm at church. Okay, let's sing. Pastor's going to preach. So I sit down. Oh, pastor's preaching again. My show's coming on soon. Come on. What? He has 7 points? 7? Come on. Okay. Oh, invitation. Oh, church is over. Okay, I did my requirements. I was there. That's all I needed to do. No, that's not how Daniel lived his life. I may have exaggerated a little bit. But he didn't just go places, do what he needed to do, just where am I supposed to go next? What do I do? Just sit here, attend. La, la, la. No, that wasn't Daniel. Daniel went. He would have gone to school, every class, with the purpose to learn something. He would have gone to church with the purpose to get something out of the message and apply to his life. What do you live by? Maybe we should sit down and think about what any purpose in our life. Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself. Is there something in your life? Do you have 5, maybe? 5 purposes, moral absolutes in your life that you want to live by? 4? Can you think of 4? 3? 2? Can you think of 1? One thing, Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself. What do you live by? Daniel was chosen by the king. Daniel lived with a purpose. Let's look at our faith, just like Daniel's. Daniel trusted in God no matter his circumstances. Are we willing to trust him as well? Think of Daniel. Okay. Sunday school, think way back when you were in Sunday school. What's the number one story you think of when you think of Daniel? Anybody? Daniel and the lion's den. Good job. The lion's den. Think about that story. I'm not going to go through it. Daniel was thrown into a lion's den. Hungry lions that want food. He trusted in God. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, later in the chapter, were thrown into a fiery furnace. They trusted in God. He shows tremendous faith throughout the whole chapter. What would you do put in those situations? And lastly, I'd like to look at our interview with the king. Daniel knew that in just 3 years, he was going to be placed before the king. And just like Daniel, we will one day be placed before the King of Kings. It could be 3 years, could be 50 years, or it could be tomorrow. Luke 21:36 says, "Watch ye therefore, and pray always, that ye may be accounted worthy to escape all these things that shall come to pass, and to stand before the Son of Man." Are you ready for your interview with the king? Daniel was not alone. Lots of children were chosen to go live in the king's palace, but only 4 were found worthy and did not conform to the world. What would be said of you if you were found in that situation? Taken from your home, renamed, and asked to live in the world. Which side would you be found on? Daniel and his friends, not conforming, living with a purpose, or everyone else just going with the flow and doing what everyone else is doing just living by the requirements? We have been chosen by the King. Will you live your life with a purpose to live for God? Will you be found like Daniel and his friends, or like the other children who conform to the world? Are you ready for your interview with the King?